So welcome everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to this Martens Centre event seminar titled An Urban Renewal, the Role of European Cities in Our Future. We have about 1 hour from now, it's 3:31. So let me just illustrate very briefly how I would propose to organize the exchange. I will briefly introduce the topic and the speakers, primarily the speakers, the distinguished speakers that have accepted to exchange with us. We will then have a couple of exchanges on the panel about the topic. After some short sort of initial thoughts of the speakers on the problem that we are discussing. And then I plan to leave around 20 minutes at the end for questions and answers. Now, of course, given the virtual environment in which we are operating, we cannot take live questions. And therefore, I will invite all listeners who would like to make a comments or ask a questions to do that in the Facebook chat. And then I will sort of pass on the comments to our speakers. The topic is complex, it's multifaceted. I would say that there are at least 3 aspects that would be interesting to cover if we can in the hour we have. The first is the growing importance of cities, but also the increasing number of challenges that they are facing. The second is the place of cities in EU policy making and in EU policies and institutions. Of course, the 2 problems are related. And the third is perhaps for us the most important, I would say, the issue of cities and the center right, because we have seen in the last few years a trend. Of course, the 2 mayors that I am about to present are exceptions to that trend, but the center right parties have faced difficulties in many cities, especially big cities, in winning elections. And I think here our speakers can give us some very interesting insights on why that is so and how that difficulties, the problem can be overcome. I would like to say, sort of since the beginning, d'entrée de jeu, that the discussion is based on a policy brief that the Martens Centre has published a couple of months ago. And I would like to thank the author, Konrad Niklewicz, and to invite all of you who are interested in the problem to have a look at the policy brief, because I think it provides a lot of interesting insights, particularly from the perspective of center-right political parties. The title of the publication is Retaking the Cities, a Plan for the Center-Right. You can find the link on the page of the event also. So let me introduce very briefly our 2 distinguished speakers. Let me welcome them, first of all, and thank them also for accepting the invitation. So I list them in alphabetical order, and I will also give them the floor in alphabetical order if they agree. So we have Mayor Kostas Bakoyannis of Athens. Welcome, Mayor. Welcome, Kostas. And we have Mayor Rafał Trzaskowski of Warsaw. Welcome. Just to briefly present their bios, you are both political scientists, I believe. Rafał was trained at the University of Warsaw and at the College of Europe in Natolin, and Kostas was trained at Brown University and Harvard University in the US. And I think you both have very interesting profile for the discussion we are about to have, because you have known the working of subnational governments in all their facets and heterogeneity. You know, a small town is not a big city. Kostas has started his political career as mayor of his ancestral town, Karpenisi. He has then moved on to become regional governor of central Greece. So he has an experience as a regional governor. And finally, in June 2019, he was elected mayor of Athens. Rafał has had also a European position as member of the European Parliament. And then at the national level, he has served as Minister of Administration and Digitalization, which I think in this role, you were also responsible for coordinating local authorities. You were Secretary of State in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Poland. You were a member of the Polish Parliament. And then, of course, more recently, in 2018, you were successfully elected Mayor of Warsaw and you narrowly lost. You almost won a very difficult presidential election last year against the incumbent Andrzej Duda. So I don't want to give a long introduction of the topic. Maybe let me just start with a little bit of a provocation by referring to an article, a political article that was quite widely publicized that appeared in July 2020 and that announced rather unceremoniously the death of the city. And the thesis of the article was that one of the victims of COVID-19 would be the city as an organizational model to the extent that we have known it, because especially if there is a second wave, and of course we are having a second wave, if not a third wave, this might result in a shift of 50 to 60%, a permanent shift of 50 to 60% of the population to permanent teleworking, and might trigger a whole series of important adjustments with people relocating potentially in the countryside and even solving some of the big challenges the cities have been facing. For example, housing shortage that would be alleviated by in such a scenario. Some of the pollution, congestion, transportation difficulties, and so on. So they were sort of imagining a future in which we solve the problems of city by killing cities. And therefore, my first question to you is: do you agree that cities might be among the victims of COVID-19? And more broadly, what is your take on the role the cities will play in our future, in the future of our continent? So I'll give the floor to Kostas first, following alphabetical order, and then to Rafael, if you agree. So Kostas, welcome again, and the floor is yours.
Greetings from Athens. It's a great pleasure to join you this afternoon. I would like to thank you for the kind invitation. And I would also like to say that I feel privileged to join my colleague, the mayor of Warsaw, whose work I've been following and whose political courage I greatly admire. So, in reference to your question, I read the same article. There were actually quite a few articles making the same point in the international press. I am tempted to respond with a story. I'm sure many of you have read about Mark Twain, whose death was apparently reported in the press while he was alive. And he responded by saying that rumors about my death are greatly exaggerated. I would say the same thing right now. I think these reports about the death of the city are greatly exaggerated. If history teaches us one thing, it's that cities are the nucleus of human culture, of human civilization. Cities are what actually brings us all together, economically, socially, politically. And if you go back to the infamous Black Death, you will see that it was followed by the Renaissance. That's about that I think is more interesting for those more romantic amongst us. But even if you go back to the Spanish flu, it was followed by the Gilded Age and the Empire State Building that was actually opened in 1930. So I think that there is a lot of ground for optimism looking forward. The question is, and that brings me to my second point, what we will actually do. Because we have literally a once in a lifetime opportunity. And the question is whether we're going to bounce back or bounce forward. I'd like to say that I don't share the assumption that, once the COVID is over or once we learn to live with COVID, we will magically move back, transferred back to the future to February 2020. I don't think that it will feel as if we have awoken from a long sleep. On the contrary, I feel that a lot has happened and that we have an opportunity to actually transform our cities. And that's also something that history teaches us. After all, the New York Central Park was a response, a public policy response to another health crisis, much like the London sewage system. My third point would be that now we have an opportunity to actually discuss about an agenda, a city agenda of the future. And I think there's some numbers, some statistics that are very clear about how we can move forward. 70% of global GDP is produced in cities, much like 70% of global gas emissions. 70% of all European regulation to actually come back to our own continent are implemented by local authorities. In cities, one can experience 1/3 of public spending and 1/3 of public investment. So it's clear that we need to rethink our agenda. And here I would like to propose 3 core elements. Number 1, democracy, rights, transparency, accountability, facts. Number 2, the environment. There's a lot of talk about the climate change. I would actually refer to it as a climate crisis. Number 3, integration, inclusion, and a very forward-driven policy that aims at actually creating more equitable cities. Now, what's missing from this discussion? What's missing from this discussion is the EU itself. It's not just the 2-dimensional model, which we talk about very often. It is the fact that there is no urban agenda in real life. I mean, the so-called Pact of Amsterdam has no meat to it. It's the fact that we are missing funds. I mean, you know, the comparison with the common agricultural policy is rather depressing. Our access, or our lack of access actually, to the recovery funds is questionable. And of course, there is this indirect and uneven distribution of structural funds. So we are missing all 3. We are missing institutional capacity, we are missing policy capacity, and we are missing funding capacity. And my last point, if we come to our own political family, I would say that now again is the opportunity. It is true that the electoral trends haven't been exactly, how can I put it diplomatically, very promising over the past few years. However, we do have the Committee of the Regions under the able presidency of my friend Apostolos Zikostas, which is a vehicle for the European Union and in which the Committee of the Regions the European People's Party plays a significant role. The high-level group on democracy that was established under Van Rompuy, I think, is a very good step forward. We have the opportunity to start by building cooperation amongst mayors of the political family, to share experience, to share knowledge, to learn from each other. Then we can proceed to some kind of institutionalization within our political family, and why not come up with a clear political agenda that can actually be attractive for our public and actually help build trust, which of course should and ought to include the creation of a new EU City Fund. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to the rest of the discussion and the conversation.
Thank you very much, Kostas, for this very concise but to the point. So the death of the city has been greatly exaggerated, and there are 2 big sort of absences in this debate: the EU itself, and perhaps also a little bit our political family, which is lagging behind in developing city-focused policies and agenda. And we will come back to some of these points certainly in the later phase of the discussion. But before that, I would like to ask Rafał to give us his own perspective from Warsaw on the problem at hand, because I think that in Poland some of these problems might look relatively different. So Rafał, the floor is yours.
Kalispera, Kostas. Eucharisto. It's really wonderful to have this conversation and to hear comments. I mean, basically, you've said it all. I could say that I agree with everything you said and here, but I will probably reinforce some of your points, some of the things that you said, even though I agree with everything. So, well, yes, I mean, the death of the cities, I mean, that's a bit premature, although we have to start thinking about the changes that COVID introduces, because it is true that after Black Death, everyone actually went home from Fiesole to Florence and so on and so forth, and people will come back to the cities, although some changes will probably stay with us forever. And I'm absolutely sure that we will have more video conferencing, that I will organize more and more meetings online because sometimes they're simply more effective. But we all know that without city networks, without personal contact, it's almost impossible to actually do business, to be creative, to develop our cities and invest in our future. So at the end of the day, the cities will remain the hub of all activity. I'm absolutely certain about it. Although, yes, there will be some changes. I mean, for example, the patterns of office rentals might change because some people will definitely be more flexible when they work from home. Yes, I mean, public transportation usage might change, and this is a headache for us all because we were quite successful in convincing people in Warsaw into actually leaving the cars at home, and 50% of our residents use public transportation. Now, of course, the patterns are somewhat different, so we will have to adapt to it. But we all know that nothing can actually substitute human touch and human contact. But yes, there will be changes, and I think that it is also for us to analyze them, to exchange our opinions, and to think how we can use some of those changes to our advantage. Now, when it comes to all the challenges that are before the European Union, before our nations, before our cities, the challenges that are most important for us, fighting the epidemic, then investing in innovativeness, investing in growth and rebounding after the crisis. When it comes to fighting the climate catastrophe, all of those things had to be done with the cities and in the cities. It is impossible to tackle any of the important priorities of the European Union when you're not investing in the cities, when you're not actually making us part of the process. Because as Kostas was saying, when it comes to innovativeness, when it comes to the number of emissions that we produce, when it comes to our importance, when it comes to the GDP of our countries, it is simply impossible to do anything without us, if we are serious about meeting the priorities of the European Union, for example. So yes, I think that our voice has to be more heard, and our positions have to be more visible. That's why we're working in all of those institutions in order for our voice to be much more forceful. I'm a member of the Committee of the Regions, and I'm a rapporteur of the Climate Pact, where we foresee certain solutions when it comes to financing for the cities. I'm also on the board of the Eurocities. I'm a treasurer of the Eurocities. I'm part of C40. I'm in the steering board of the Convent of Mayors. There are quite a lot of possibilities in Europe to actually influence the policy making. And it is also true that EPP has to wake up because we have those contacts in some of those organizations. Of course, we are organized within the Committee of the Regions along the party lines, but we need more mobilization among the mayors from the EPP. I've heard about Kostas' work. There is a new mayor of Madrid. There are quite a few mayors coming from our political family with which we can actually work and make our contribution a bit more visible. And I think that there are things that unite us, because yes, we are from center-right, but we are quite progressive on many of the policies. That's why we were elected. We are looking into the future. We are responsible, but we are also thinking how to help the weaker. And this has nothing to do with the divide between left and right. It is about us being progressive, looking into the future, European, and responsible. Today, that's the real division between the populist parties, which are looking to the back, which are trying to divide us, and those who are responsible. And unfortunately, we're a force to be reckoned with within the EPP. Now, in order to be more visible, in order for us to actually be able to meet the priorities, yes, we need to be treated more seriously, and that's why that's what we are doing within the Committee of the Regions. We are starting a second chamber of the Convent of Mayors, where more people, more friends of ours, under the leadership of Tsitsi Kostas, will be present, where our voice will be heard. This is very, very important. We are also creating this network of Green Deal ambassadors. I'm one of them, where we are at the forefront of fighting for a cleaner air and fighting the climate change. And of course, we're actually proposing certain solutions. As Konrad Niklewicz proposed certain solutions in his paper, we're also proposing such solutions on a European level, where we think that there needs to be more financing, direct financing, EU financing for the cities themselves. Because as I've said, I mean, some of our governments are difficult, especially the Polish one. They're trying to disperse the money according to political criteria. They are not really serious about fighting some of the challenges that are before us, for example, climate change. And it is impossible to do it with us. You cannot fight climate change without the cities. You cannot be innovative without the cities. You cannot invest in research and modern education without the cities. That's why we think that it's a win-win solution if the European Union, especially in the recovery fund, in the Green Deal funds, would foresee a possibility for the cities to actually use the money directly, a part of it, a small part of it, outside of the national envelope. If we could, for example, take all the diesel-powered buses from the streets of European cities in 4 or 5 years, that would be a win-win situation, which would be seen all over Europe, and which would actually help the European Commission demonstrate that some of its policies, some of the policy of the European Union are really concrete and are put into action. So such proposals are already on the table. We are lobbying for them to be supported. A lot of cities, mayors of the cities from across the board signed them, and now it's our goal to actually do it and to use our power in some of those institutions that I mentioned, also creating synergies with the European Parliament, creating synergies when some of our colleagues can with the government, in order to meet those priorities. Because without the cities, the future will be uncertain. Without the cities, it will be impossible to actually rejuvenate the economy after the crisis and meet all of those priorities that are before us. And the final word is about the EPP. I mean, we have this EPP local dialogue, and I think that we should invest in it. I think that we should include more and more regional leaders and city leaders in order to sell our message across, and also demonstrate that we are the party of the future, that EPP does not mean necessarily people who are only about tradition. That EPP means, yes, a respect for tradition, but also a forward-looking bunch of people who are implementing a modern European agenda in our capitals and in our most important cities in Europe.
Thank you very much, Rafael, for your remarks. And a lot of this, of course, goes directly in the direction of Konrad's paper, Martens Centre paper, especially when it comes to EPP, the possibility of new EPP structures. Konrad, I would like to remind it, is proposing a more formalized cooperation of mayors from the EPP, as some of you said. He's also proposing a specific working group of the EPP that would deal with city-specific challenges, and he is proposing an EPP city agenda to rebalance the party agenda, not away from the focus on rural areas and the common agricultural policy, which is a traditional area of focus of the EPP, but to combine the two. And maybe just a quick follow-up questions for Rafał. The first is, well, Poland is a country in which, you know, the political dynamics of the city and of the countryside seem to be particularly polarized. And probably it is an exception in the sense that in Poland, more than in other countries, the EPP is successful in big cities. So my question for you is, how can we rebalance our agenda as center-right without losing ground in the countryside, having a win-win, sort of fostering a new positive relationship between the cities and the countryside? That's my first sort of follow-up question. And then I would also want to understand from you, since you are a member of the Committee of the Region, whether the institutional sort of representation of city in the EU is adequate in your opinion. Because from what you have said, you have mentioned some of the bodies, you know, the Committee of the Regions, Eurocities. There are several formal and informal sort of bodies in which cities are represented. You seem to be satisfied with that. Well, there are some voices also ahead of the future of Euro conference who are demanding, you know, a stronger role, even institutional role of cities within EU institutions. So do you see any scope for that in the current debate?
Well, I was a minister of European affairs. I was a member of the European Parliament, so I know quite well those institutional games. And I'm not sure that we need necessarily to create new institutions. We just need to be heard, and we need to be more successful, more effective. And I think that all of our partners need to understand that they have to create synergies and listen to our voice more carefully. And as a member of the Committee of the Regions, I can see that slowly and surely the committee is being heard, and we create those synergies with our friends in the European Parliament. But of course, I think that our participation, for example, in the conference about the future of Europe should be more visible. I think that the European Commission should make everything so that when we create our national programs, that the voice not only of the regions but all the cities should be heard, and that's what I'm lobbying for within the European Commission, for the criteria to be transparent, and that the policies that the European Commission proposes and then member states with the European Parliament accept, they need to take more seriously the urban dimension, because without that there will be no development of the European Union. And now one thing is, of course, to create a small fund which could be directly used by the cities, but another thing is simply to take into consideration, especially with the new instruments, to create such policies that are going to be able to be realized only in the cities, and that's the role for the European Commission to propose that. Otherwise, as I've said, meeting priorities, EU priorities, will be simply impossible. And I think that creating the synergies between the Committee of the Regions, the Convent of Mayors, with the participation of the European Commission and the European Parliament, if we create the synergies right, if we work together on actually meeting those priorities, that we can succeed, and that there is no need to actually create new institutions. But yes, the EPP also has to take us more seriously as the mayors of the cities and hear our voice and put it into their program. And I think that most of the ideas that Konrad put in his paper is going in the right direction. Now, when it comes to the division between the cities and the rural areas, Poland is fortunate enough that we have 12 metropolitan areas. It is not just Warsaw which keeps the country going. There are 12 different urban centers, very, very, very dynamic urban centers, not 2 or 3, but 12. Poznań, Wrocław, Gdańsk, Lublin, Katowice, and so on and so forth. Now, yes, it is true that the opposition, most of them connected to our party, are winning, because we are fighting with the conservative forces, with the populist forces. So we are the progressives, not the left. The left is much weaker in Poland. Now, what we need to do, we need to convince everyone that we are actually meeting the priorities for everyone. First of all, when Warsaw is what money is taken away from Warsaw, that means it is very difficult to connect Warsaw to the surrounding areas, to the surrounding municipalities, and create those synergies which are going to help the whole region. And this is not only against us, it is against the regions, the municipalities that encircle Warsaw. If, for example, our universities or our entrepreneurs are actually being penalized politically because they are in Warsaw, we need to show everyone else that that actually penalizes the country as such. And we need to convince, and that's what we're doing, our friends in the rural areas, that they of course need to be supported, and that the structural policy needs to support the underdeveloped areas, but that they cannot really do it on their own, that there is this synergy which is incredibly important. And that's why I am trying to consolidate the local mayors, and not only of the big cities, but of the smaller cities and all the municipalities. We create this movement together in order to convince everyone that this is actually a win-win situation in which those synergies can be created, and in which growth that comes from the cities actually can permeate and also influence other areas. It is also a political problem that progressive European forces are usually weaker in the rural areas, but we are doing our best to change that.
Thank you very much, Rafał. I'd like to get back to Kostas now, and first of all to ask you, Kostas, if you could comment about this urban-rural gap that Rafał was mentioning in the Polish context. If you could tell us a little bit more about the Greek context, whether you see that tendency in Greece as well, and whether you think that the center-right parties, EPP parties, have a particular maybe capacity to bridge the divide for the reasons that we were partly discussing, because they are strong in the countryside too. And then, then I have a follow-up question on the policy specifically, but maybe you can answer this first.
Well, it's not a black and white answer. First of all, I would say that the urban-rural divide, which you refer to, is not as strong, at least in Greece, as it is in other countries. That doesn't mean that that it doesn't exist. It means that it doesn't run so deep. Half of the Greek population lives in Attica and Salonika, and the rest are in the country in smaller cities. So I wouldn't say that this has such strong political, economic, social, or cultural characteristics. Although I should say that we are doing our best, and I think that there is some space for criticism here, at least from the point of view of the European Union, to actually not only draw this line, but actually make the divide as deep as possible. And that has to do with the allocation of funds that we all spoke about a bit earlier. Of course, having said that, Athens is where, to a great extent, the political agenda of the country is set. And that doesn't only have to do with Athens being the physical seat of government. It also has to do with the natural characteristics of Athens as a capital. And we saw that over the past few years. I mean, there were literally times in the difficult times of Greece, right in this middle, at the heart of the economic crisis, when Athens resembled the Weimar Republic. And yet, we managed to survive and actually come out of this crisis with our democracy stronger, our institutions more solid, and with a newfound sense of optimism and dynamism. And that, I think, to a great extent, has to do with the very responsible position of Nea Demokratia in the past 5 or 6 years, with a position that was very clear, based on truth and transparency and accountability, against populism and fake facts. So I think that there are some political lessons to be drawn that I think can be very helpful for all of us moving forward.
Thanks, Kostas. Moving on, the topic that we have already mentioned of rebalancing EU policies. Of course, when you look at the composition of the EU budget, it's quite clear that the focus on rural areas through the common agricultural policy is much stronger than the focus on urban areas. You were mentioning the urban agenda, which of course is peanuts compared to the common agricultural policy. Therefore, there might be a case for rebalancing that sort of situation. Also because the common agricultural policy, as we know, reaches farmers throughout the union, while many instruments for supporting cities are tied either to regional development funds or to cohesion funds, and therefore many cities in sort of richer member states do not have access to those funds. So my question is then, if, as Konrad proposes in his paper, we are going to create an EU cities fund, meaning a fund that would specifically support finance investments in cities, what should be, first of all, the focus, in your opinion, of this fund, which also means what are the areas of local policy in which the EU could intervene more directly, maybe more massively favoring investment than it is doing so far? And how do you address the objections of those who say that this is ultimately, for the sake of empowering city, a violation of subsidiarities, because the EU would be directly intervening in matters that should be left, at the national and subnational level?
Well, I mean, I think this conversation about subsidiarity, to be perfectly honest, is quite theoretical. It's more of a theological discussion. I mean, we can talk about subsidiarity, we can talk about so-called active subsidiarity. I mean, there's always a way to agree on the words. The question is whether we agree on the premise and our working assumptions. I mean, this is about actually learning to build bottom up. This is about actually providing real solutions to real problems. This is about designing modern policies and not just being stuck in the past or just about anachronisms. This is about building coalitions, not only political coalitions, but also social coalitions. And this is about building trust. So, of course, I think the key question for us right now is to actually be able to convince our friends in the European Parliament, in the Commission, and why not even in the European Council, that we need to be able to have direct access to funding. Cities need to have direct access to funding, because what's happening right now is that this access is being either blocked at worst, much like in the case of Poland, or it may be filtered by other priorities. And I think there's a very strong case to be made in this direction. Now, I saw a recent initiative of the European Commission. I think it's called the Bauhaus Initiative. Seems rather abstract, to be perfectly honest to me, but it might be a step in the right direction. I hope at least that it's the beginning of a realization that something needs to change. I mean, we really, earlier I mentioned about lessons learned. I mean, we had a very tough decade in Greece, and I think many of our European partners had tough decades. It seems that this new decade hasn't really started in the best possible way. So we really need to draw from the lessons of the past and actually help our societies come closer to Europe rather than just to, push them apart.
Thank you, Kostas. It's funny that you mentioned the European Bauhaus, because indeed it's one example of how the Commission is somehow entering a field that so far was left largely untouched, that of urban planning, like concepts of urban planning that can be implemented potentially across the Union. Of course, I find it a bit ironic that you would launch a new artistic movement from the Berlaymont building. And if you have seen what I mean, probably the first task of this Bauhaus should be to rebuild many of the institutions themselves, which are not exactly examples of architectural beauty. But yeah, I get your point. Maybe I will get back to Rafael and pick up on an issue that he has raised, that he has mentioned in one of his previous answers, which is the doubts about political allocation of funding in some member states. I mean, Poland, of course, is a case in point, but there are others. In Hungary, the same, for example. A doubt difficulty has been raised, meaning that the fact that cities held by opposition mayors, by politically, but by mayors that are not affiliated with the government party, might not be able to have the same access to European funding, including the recovery plan and all the massive, new budgetary provisions that have been approved, compared to other government sort of friendly mayors. And so the question then becomes, there has been a debate that started at the European level, partly with the conditionality mechanism, etc., on how to tackle these matters. But what can be done, in your opinion, to solve that problem? What can cities do, and what can the EU do and European political parties do to avoid, the worst consequences of that sort of scenario?
Well, I think there are at least three solutions. First of all, as I've said, direct funding, at least part of it. And of course, we all know that 95% of the money will go through national envelopes. So we are talking about small programs, but programs which would be very important for us and which could actually be based on quite a significant amount of money, because, I mean, we are talking billions when we talk about recovery plans, or even trillions. Now, the second solution is, of course, tailor-made programs by the European Commission that can be used only in the cities. Because if the Commission comes with tailor-made programs, and then these are agreed by the states and the European Parliament, then they simply cannot be spent only in the rural areas. They have to be spent in the cities. And I think that should be the priority of the European Union. And thirdly, serious treatment of consultations, because our government, for example, is consulting the recovery plans only on paper and only with the regions, and it's not including the cities in these consultations. And of course, transparent non-political criteria. The European Commission should make absolutely sure that when it accepts the programs, that the transparency is upheld, and that the criteria are non-political. And I think that using those three instruments, we can make sure that the governments who are actually waging war against local government are not going to get away with it.
Okay, thank you. Very, very interesting and actionable points that probably the Commission should keep in mind, you know, when framing some of the spending programs under the new budget. I have there are questions from the listeners, from the audience that start flowing in. So maybe I will start by asking at least one of them. Probably we can take both. So one has to do with the demographic trends. How do we catch up, asks the first listener, with the demographic trend, and how to improve the quality of life in our cities, live in smarter, greener, more accessible and interconnected cities, while at the same time the population density is increasing. So that's the first question, demographic trends and population density, how to tackle that challenge. And the second question, I think, is interesting because it raises one aspect that so far has remained under track. It's a bit different. So maybe I'll ask both of you to briefly answer maybe this question, and then I'll come back with the second remark. Maybe we can start from Kostas.
Well, there is no short answer, really. I mean, I think both of us can actually talk about this for hours. Let me be as concise as I possibly can. Number one, demographics, of course, are an issue. They're a huge issue, especially in Greece. And it's not just the ratio of births and deaths, it's also aging. So, of course, looking forward, we need to be very deliberate about designing primary health policies and social services for a more extended lifespan. Having said that, cities do have the natural advantage of actually being younger than the rest of our countries. I think that is a rule, and it's clearly the case. And it's this human capital that we can actually count on. I do truly believe that there is this global race going on right now. It's a global race for 3 prizes or trophies: for investment, for tourism or visitors, and for talent. Because, you know, as this crisis showed, talent can actually be rather mobile in the new economy. And as we all compete in this race, we all have, you know, 3 goals. Number 1 is to reclaim or liberate quality public space. I think our citizens need space to walk, to play, to enjoy. Number 2, sustainable mobility. Earlier on, my colleague mentioned public transportation. It's a huge issue. It's a huge issue that is also politically and ideologically charged. So we need to reclaim it. But it's not just public transport. It's also alternative means, whether it is walking or cycling or anything else. And number 3 is actually making sure, especially for us who are blessed to live in European cities with long and rich histories, that we actually transform without losing our soul, which means that we have to make sure that we protect mixed land use and keep our DNA, because that's actually what gives us the extra boost in a global world.
Thank you, Kostas. Very, very clear and concise. Rafa, this is an important, of course, challenge. So would you like to intervene here?
Well, I agree with Kostas. I mean, most importantly, I think that all of us are now concentrating on quality of life. And of course, demographic challenges are very important because we have to prevent urban sprawl. And we need to also concentrate on equal chances. And that's what we are doing in most of our cities. And yes, we need to create cities which are sustainable, especially when it comes to green energy, when it comes to fighting climate change, quality of air. That's why we are actually investing in public transportation. That's why we are actually liquidating all of the gas-powered stoves. That's why we are retrofitting. That's why we are investing in green areas and in parks. That's why we are actually having city subsidies to renewables. We just need to be sustainable. And I think with every mayor that I talk to, regardless of the political family, we basically have very similar priorities. And that's why I submitted to the European Commission that we are the ones who are really serious about fighting for EU priorities, and that's why we need to be supported and our voice needs to be heard.
Thank you, Rafa. There is a second question that brings, I think, to the discussion, a dimension that was hidden so far. But I suspect it is important. Maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong. And it is the subtle differences that exist in sort of tackling some of these challenges within the big cities. You represent two big cities, Athens and Warsaw, of course, and the small and medium-sized cities. So, Rafa, you said that most mayors tend to agree, but the one listener is asking, isn't there a risk that, let's assume that the EU would be in a position to approve a city's agenda that finances some key policy supports cities? It is likely that big cities will probably benefit disproportionately from such an agenda. Isn't there a risk that we are going to further, polarize big cities and small and medium-sized cities, maybe also draining some of the energies of small cities towards big cities and big capital cities? Do you see that risk? Maybe we can start again from Kostas and then return to Rafael.
I mean, I'm tempted to respond that life is full of risks, and we need to assume some if we want to move forward. But to be a bit more serious about this, I've had the privilege to serve as a small town mayor. I've had the privilege to serve as a head of region outside Athens, outside Attica. I don't feel in any case that, at least in the case of Greece, there is such a risk. After all, what we're experiencing right now, because you also one has to look at the total European budget, including common agricultural policy, is an striking lack of balance, a striking asymmetry. So we have a long way to go until we actually reach the point when we need to actually put some safety, let's say, mechanisms in place to ensure that the distribution does not unfairly, help cities.
Okay, thank you. Rafa, would you like to comment about that? And I also would add a follow-up question, if you allow me. Moving on the side of political cooperation, we have been discussing a lot of policies, but of course there is also a political aspect in the engagement of cities at the European and international level. And you, in fact, have been among the initiators of one initiative, which I think is very interesting to probably mention and discuss, which is the Pact of the Free Cities. And, it's a project that you have established in 2019 together with the mayors of Prague, Budapest, and Bratislava. So maybe you could comment on the question that I have asked Kostas, but also tell us more a little bit about this initiative from the perspective of what it means in terms of possibilities of cities to engage politically and to leave a mark at the European and international stage.
Well, I mean, the whole idea between the Pact of Four Cities was actually to make our cities more visible and to allow, to sell the message. Basically, we have difficult governments which are not serious about meeting EU priorities, which are, in case of Poland and to a certain extent also in case of Hungary, not serious about the rule of law. They're not serious about fighting climate change. They're not serious about urban agenda, because they simply treat European money politically. And we wanted to sell the message that, Hungary and Poland and the Czech Republic and Slovakia are not just the governments, but it's also very strong local and regional authorities which are independent and serious about meeting EU priorities. And that's why we do it, also to exchange our own experiences in managing the cities in such a difficult political atmosphere. But our initiative, for example, we were the ones who came up with direct financing, was supported by many other cities, and we also collaborate when it comes to benchmarking and exchanging information with all the cities in Europe, in all of those organizations that I've just enumerated. The Committee of the Regions, of course, being one of the most important ones, and that's why through the Convent of Mayors and through the Committee of the Regions, we are trying to put our views into wider circulation. As I've told you, I'm a rapporteur of the Committee of the Regions, and the whole idea that Kostas and I and many other mayors support now became an official position of the Committee of the Regions. And of course, it is easier to defend it vis-a-vis other European institutions and to lobby for it when it has such a broad support. And I think that hopefully the governments, and most importantly the European Commission as the initiator of the EU legislation, will hear us loud and clear. When it comes to those differences between the cities, I mean, to be absolutely honest, I don't see that as a problem, because we are consolidating the mayors of all the cities. Throughout the weekend, I was in one of the southwestern regions, and I've met with quite a lot of mayors from medium and smaller sized cities, and they have exactly the same problems. I mean, they have exactly the same priorities, which are about the quality of life. We are all fighting COVID, and we are treated as enemies by the government, and of course we are the ones who are at the first front fighting COVID, and you know, the chaos which is on the national level, we are then responsible in introducing it on the ground. I'm responsible for 10 hospitals. I'm managing 10 hospitals. Some of the mayors are managing just one, but we have very similar problems. Now the government, for example, wants to centralize them. So when we talk about, you know, EU priorities or what we need to do together when it comes to, for example, fighting air pollution, or doing retrofitting, or dealing with our senior citizens, we are facing exactly the same challenges, and all of those programs that we are proposing can be tailor-made both for big, medium, and smaller sized cities. If I say, let's take all the diesel-powered buses from the streets of our cities, you know, in Poland, it's not just the 12 metropolises. There's more than 100 cities that such a plan could be implemented in. So at the end of the day, I think that if we lobby together, we lobby in the name of more visibility and more access for the regions and for the local authorities and for the cities. And we are actually strengthening the voice of this third level of the local government, regardless whether it comes from the region, from the capital city, or from a small city, and also from the rural areas, because you know, the council municipalities, even from the east of Poland, are opposing the centralization of the hospital management just as strongly as Warsaw. So I think there's quite a lot of things that we can do together. And at the end of the day, also in this very a difficult political climate, when I come to a small city where most of the people vote for the government, when I come in my political hat, it is more difficult. But when I come in my local government hat, when we, for example, helped the smaller communities when they were flooded just a few months ago, and Warsaw helped with financial help, we are treated differently because they see that we speak the same language, we have the same problems and same priorities. And this is the role for the EPP, to be sensitive to it and to use the power of the local authorities in order to strengthen its image as a party of the future, as a progressive party, and not as a party of old apparatchiks. And I think that's something we should focus on changing and doing together, because I know that within the EPP structures we have lots of young, energetic leaders, also in the European Parliament and on the national level. But I'm absolutely convinced that you have even more energy and more dynamism among our local and regional leaders, and let's by all means use that potential on the EPP level as well, because we're really well organized, and it's high time we made use of it.
Actually, my next question would have been, indeed, you are both very successful EPP center-right mayors. As I have said, I mean, this is not self-evident these days. So I was going to ask you, what are, in your opinion, the key issues that, you know, the center-right parties should focus at the city level to win? And you have partly already answered that question. But maybe you can think if you want to add anything in the last intervention that I will ask you. Maybe you can already,
yeah. I will be very brief, because as I've said at the beginning, and that's what I'm trying to convince my colleagues to say at the same time, there is very difficult to talk about this division left and right, and what is really center-right today. I mean, it is very different when we look at Kostas and me, and when we look at some national leaders. It is very different when we talk about CSU and Moderaten, for example. But at the end of the day, we are the party which is forward-looking European, which is responsible, which has a lot of experience and which is well organized, and which is also can be quite progressive on quite a lot of issues. So I think that we should work on our platform in order to say what the real difference is. And the real difference is that we can be as progressive as all the others, we can be as European, we can be as close to the people, we can be as centered on quality of life, but at the same time, there is responsibility, there is experience, and there is this attachment to values, which is very, very important. There is this spine that we all adhere to. And I think that if we combine the two, that can create quite a powerful machine and send quite a powerful message to the people that we're not the party of the old, that we're party of the new, like Neue Demokratia, and that we're actually forward-looking, very much robust, and that we can actually bring people together. It's just a question of being active, being together, exchanging good experiences, and showing the new faces all around.
Thank you, Rafał. That's a very optimistic and positive and inspirational message. Thank you for that. Kostas, what do you say?
Well, I fully agree with Rafał. I fully agree. I would just add the following. Let's start thinking about the next generation. Today's 15, 16, 17-year-olds, the TikTok generation. What makes them tick? What's actually important to them? Number one, it is the environment, whether in its physical state as we experience it in the city, or more generally. Number two, rights, democratic rights, for example, gay rights. Number three, technology, which means that we have to bridge the digital divide. And number four, having an equitable distribution, making sure that we actually work towards social cohesion. Now, none of these necessarily have to have an ideological plus or minus. None of these have to be either right or left issues. These can be our own issues. This can be our agenda. It is our agenda to a great extent, and it's our agenda to a great extent because it's the agenda of modern real life. So EPP does have all the advantages. We just need to wake up and reclaim our natural space.
Thanks, Kostas, and it's good that you also said something about digitalization, because there was a question about that I could not take for reasons of space. We are probably to wrap it up, so I will not try to summarize or to offer any takeaway, because it was a rich discussion, so everyone will be able to take home whatever they find most interesting about it. Maybe two or three things that I would conclude on. The first, I started, with the article on the death of the cities. Well, I think after the discussion, we can say that regardless of COVID, we all agree that a sizable part of our future, our social and economic future, will be decided in cities. So this is not, I think the implications are not fully understood, and we mentioned some of the changes that are needed at the European level. But I hope that this discussion has contributed to clarifying in what sense, we need to focus on this matter. The second point that I would make, and I think it was implied in a lot of your statements, especially the latest ones, on the need to focus on the real problems, the real issues on the ground. The more the EU transforms itself, and it is transforming itself objectively with this recovery fund, the green policy, social policy, from what it used to be, which is a regulatory state, focusing on rather neutral, regulatory framework, into a much more active executive power, which is close with its effects to the people. Well, the more the EU does this, the more it will need the cities, because the cities have, as we said, they have the knowledge on the ground of the local needs, and they have the legitimacy. Let's not forget, we have not mentioned it, but all sort of opinion poll says that citizens trust cities, local governments, much more than they trust the national governments. So that's important. And finally, about the center right, I think there was a very positive message from both of you, very similar, by the way. So cities are not lost to the center-right. You are the living proof of that. So we as center-right can play an important role in cities if we focus on the real needs of the people, and if we reorient our European agenda in that direction. So I would really like to thank both of you for your contribution, everyone who has listened to us, who has asked question, and I hope we'll reconvene, in the future soon to discuss these and other matters. Thank you very much, Kostas, Rafael, and everyone involved.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Eucharisto, Kostas, and see you.
Καλά.